Hey guys, tonight we begin in the dry heat of the ancient Levant, where the wind carries dust and scripture in equal measure. You're standing on sun-baked earth, barefoot maybe. There's the smell of sheep, olive oil, and parchment ink in the air. The houses are square, flat-roofed. Not much to look at. But inside those walls are scrolls, stories, lineage, law, memory. It's not gold, and it's not steel, but in this world, knowing how to read makes you powerful in a very quiet way. Welcome to the early days of the Jewish people. Nomadic at first, then tribal, then templed, exiled, returned, exiled again. A people who, from the very beginning, seemed less interested in conquering land and more obsessed with writing down the rules of living. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit cross-legged beside a bearded elder, who's murmuring something in ancient Hebrew. He's not shouting. There are no swords in his belt, just a scroll and a boy at his side trying to trace each letter with his finger. You blink and realize this is school. This is where it starts. In a time when most of the world passed knowledge from mouth to mouth, like a secret told at dusk, the early Jews were writing it all down. They wrote names, commandments, food laws, genealogies, even debates. That's right, they wrote down arguments between rabbis and preserved both sides, because someday someone might need to understand why. And here's the wild thing. This devotion to the written word was happening while other civilizations were building pyramids, warring with bronze, or inventing coins. The Jewish people, they were building a library in their heads. Now, historians still argue whether this early textual culture was as widespread as later rabbis like to claim. Maybe not every shepherd boy in Judea could read the Torah fluently, but there's little doubt that the value placed on knowledge was unusually high. And not just divine knowledge, practical, ethical, communal wisdom too. You shuffle past a marketplace. Someone is arguing about whether to sell grain on the Sabbath. Another is reciting a law about leaving a corner of the field for the poor. These aren't just superstitions. They're systems quiet, handwritten systems to preserve dignity, justice, and identity in a land that rarely offered any of those things in return. And you begin to see the shape of something. A people who can't always count on armies, but can count on books, or more precisely scrolls, papyrus and ink. Word by word by word? That might sound boring, but imagine it like this. You live in a time when empires collapse, like badly stacked pots. You live surrounded by foreign gods and fickle kings, and the only thing keeping your community together is a shared story. A long one. So long, in fact, that every boy must memorize parts of it, and every elder must correct him gently when he forgets. Here's something else. In early Jewish culture, teaching your child to read wasn't a luxury. It was a duty, an obligation, a commandment, which meant that Jewish literacy, even when surrounded by largely illiterate populations, started to rise, slowly, quietly, like water carving stone. One quirk you might enjoy: the Hebrew alphabet doesn't have vowels, so early readers had to know the words already to read them properly. It's a bit like being told to read the Sentiangswathtani VWLs. Not so easy if you're guessing, but if you've heard it before, your brain fills in the blanks. That's how oral tradition and written tradition dance together. You lean against a fig tree listening. The sun is low now. Someone begins to chant from memory, not because he wants to show off, but because remembering is survival. The Romans may come, the Babylonians might return, but if the scroll survives, so does the soul. Historians still debate just how exceptional this early devotion to law and language was. Were other ancient cultures equally literate, just not as well documented? Possibly. But what makes the Jewish story so compelling is how self-aware it was. They knew they were different, and they leaned into it not with swords but with syllables. That's where it all begins. A love of learning, planted like a seed in the soil of suffering. Not flashy, not fast, but deeply rooted. and surprisingly portable. When temples fall, scrolls travel. When kings die, words remain. You close your eyes. You hear the soft scratch of a reed pen. You feel the warmth of firelight on old hands. A story is being copied, one that's already been copied 100 times before. But someone is still copying it tonight, and someone will copy it again tomorrow, because that's what survival looks like when knowledge is your homeland. You wake up or drift deeper in beside a different river now, a wide one. The banks are lined with tall reeds and the city of Babylon looms behind you. The air smells like clay, incense and dust from chariot wheels. You're not exactly home, but you're not quite lost either. This is exile, 6th century. BCE, the temple in Jerusalem has been destroyed again, and thousands of Jews have been taken to Babylon. Not in chains exactly, but not by choice either. You're among them now, listening to the quiet hum of survival in a foreign land. Here's the twist. Exile wasn't just suffering. It was also sharpening instead of fading. Jewish identity gets crisper here. Strange, isn't it? You might expect a people torn from their temple, their land, and their monarchy to dissolve like salt in river water. But somehow here in Babylon, they don't just survive, they reinvent. You pass a small house. Inside, a man is teaching his son not how to farm, but how to copy law from memory. Another house has a scribe, meticulous, silent, tracing out letters on parchment, like they were seeds of something that might grow again someday. And in a sense they are. This is where we start seeing the Torah become portable. Before it lived in temples and rituals. Now it travels inside scrolls, inside memory, inside arguments over dinner. What was once sacred architecture becomes sacred text. And there's more. The Babylonian exile gives birth to something quietly revolutionary, the synagogue. You stumble into one now, modest, tucked between stone alleys. No sacrifices, no smoke rising from altars, just people gathering to read, debate, chant. Not because they have power, but because they don't. Historians still argue whether synagogues began during exile or slightly after. But almost everyone agrees. They grew as a direct response to being cut off from the temple. If you can't go to Jerusalem, bring Jerusalem to your neighborhood. There's a beauty to that idea, portable holiness. It's like watching a people turn memory into infrastructure. Where other cultures built fortresses, the Jews built footnotes. And speaking of footnotes, this is when things start getting deeply literary. You pass a study circle of men poring over texts, not just reading them, but arguing with them. Was Abraham righteous because of his actions or his faith? Was the law given all at once or piece by piece? You don't need to know the answers. You just need to show up, think, and stay curious. You probably didn't think of Babylon as a place of quiet intellectual flourishing. Did you? But here in the heart of exile, the Jews become obsessed with remembering, retelling, reweaving themselves from story. You sit beside the Euphrates one twilight and hear a psalm being sung. By the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept. The voice is soft, cracked, old, but the words are sharp. You can feel their weight, not just grief but structure. The psalm is both lament and lesson. And soon, something surprising happens. Babylon becomes a center of Jewish learning. The Babylonian Talmud, one of the foundational texts of Jewish life, will eventually emerge from this region, not immediately, but centuries later, rooted in the very mindset that began here. The exile becomes productive. Let's pause for a small irony, shall we? While Babylon was once the place that ended Jewish monarchy, it quietly nurtured Jewish intellect. What looked like the end was once again a beginning. There's another detail worth noting, and it floats softly like incense smoke in the corners of your mind. Being a minority in exile makes you adaptable. You can't assume power. You can't assume safety. What you can assume is change. And so you learn how to learn. You memorize. You annotate. You argue without shouting. You write without temples. You rebuild with words. One elder tells you this with a wink as he slices pomegranate. We are a people of the book, because the book never burns the way cities do. He's not wrong. Empires will rise and fall. Palaces will turn to rubble, but somewhere, on some worn piece of parchment, a boy will still be tracing Hebrew letters with the side of his finger, learning not how to fight, but how to remember. You look around. The stars are bright above Babylon tonight. Somewhere behind you, a fire crackles softly. Scrolls rest in quiet baskets. The elders have stopped talking. The children are falling asleep. And maybe, so are you. You blink and the bricks of Babylon fade into marble columns and olive groves. Now you're in the Mediterranean, somewhere between Judea and Athens. The sun is brighter here, and so is the conversation. You're in the Hellenistic world now. Greek ideas rule the day. Symmetry, logic, drama, gods with sculpted abs. And into this world walks a Jewish philosopher. Scroll in hand, beard slightly windblown, sandals dusty. This is where things get complicated. See, Jewish communities are no longer confined to Judea or Babylon. After the conquests of Alexander the Great, Jewish enclaves spring up in Alexandria, Syria, and cities you may not remember from geography class. And here's the twist, they don't just survive, they thrive. You duck into a study hall. Half the scrolls are in Hebrew, the other half in Greek. Somewhere, someone's quoting Plato and Moses in the same breath. You sip a clay cup of something bitter and realize, this is intellectual fusion cuisine. Jewish thinkers like Philo of Alexandria emerged during this time, trying to reconcile Greek philosophy with Jewish theology. Logos meets Torah. Stoicism brushes up against monotheism. It's a thoughtful party and everyone brought a scroll. But here's the tension. Not everyone likes the mashup. Back in Judea, some Jews see Hellenization as dangerous. Too many Greek statues. Too much emphasis on the body. Not enough Sabbath. So debates erupt not with swords yet, but with words. And sometimes those are sharper. You sit beside a courtyard fountain. Two men argue. Can Greek logic explain the miracles? Should Hebrew scripture be translated? Spoiler alert, it eventually is. Into Greek. That version is called the Septuagint. And while it makes Jewish wisdom more accessible, it also opens the door to misinterpretation. You sigh, translation is never neutral. Meanwhile, the broader Greek world sees Jews as odd, not because they're poor or uneducated. In fact, quite the opposite. Many Jews are literate, numerate, and tightly networked. That's both impressive and unsettling. To some, it feels like too much self-assurance, too much cohesion. Historians still argue whether this was the birth of true anti-Semitism. Maybe, maybe not. But suspicion starts to simmer. You can feel it in the market stalls, in the way a merchant eyes the Jewish trader, who always seems to calculate prices faster. You walk past a statue of Apollo. Its gaze is stone-cold perfect, but something in you prefers the quiet. Scribbles of a student, arguing with the text of Deuteronomy. That's the thing. Greek culture prized answers. Jewish culture? It embraced the question. Take a break here. Stretch your legs. Maybe pour some tea. Because this next part involves resistance. In Judea, things heat up under Antiochus IV, a Seleucid ruler who pushes Hellenization hard. He bans circumcision, desecrates the temple, basically tries to scrub out Jewish religious practice with marble dust and Greek rhetoric. And you know what happens next. The Maccabean Revolt. A guerrilla resistance led by a family of priests. You duck under an olive tree as rebels, crushed past with makeshift weapons and scrolls. Tucked into their belts, faith once academic becomes defiant. Hanukkah comes from this moment, a festival of lights born not just from military victory, but from the stubborn refusal to forget. You return to Alexandria now. The scrolls are still being copied. A boy recites both Socrates and Samuel. A girl corrects his pronunciation, and you realize the Jewish mind is learning how to live in two worlds at once. One foot in ancient law, the other in contemporary culture. That takes balance, and balance, as you know, is exhausting. The tension will never fully resolve. But from it emerges something deeply refined. Jewish thought that can spar with Plato, debate Aristotle, adapt without dissolving. You sit in the corner of a library that smells like sea salt and old paper. Outside, the world spins toward Roman rule. But inside, the scrolls remain open. A teacher mutters, "May your children be like olive shoots around your table." It's both a blessing and a strategy. Teach them, train them, trust that knowledge will outlast kings. And just before sleep tugs you under, you hear another quiet chant, not in Greek, not in Latin, but in Hebrew, soft and resilient. Still here, still learning. You awaken or maybe just shift slightly to the heavy echo of boots. Rome has arrived. Not the crumbling marble romanticized centuries later, but the real thing, leather sandals, stone roads, taxation without negotiation. You're walking through a city that smells like iron, olives, and ambition. Judea is under Roman rule now, and the atmosphere is tense. You glance at a group of Jewish merchants quietly unloading goods at the market. Cautious, precise, always watching. There's admiration from some, suspicion from others. The Romans admire order, but they don't trust what they don't understand. And Jewish monotheism? Well, that's confusing. No statues, no sacrifices to Caesar, just one invisible god and a strict day of rest? Odd, uncooperative, possibly subversive. You pass by a Roman official grumbling about how those people don't integrate. They won't eat with us. They won't marry us. They think they're special. You keep walking. You've heard this before and you'll hear it again. Historians still argue whether Jewish distinctiveness was a form of social preservation or an inevitable source of tension. Probably both. But one thing's certain, in the Roman imagination, difference often meant danger, and the Jews with their scrolls and stubborn rituals stood out like ink on white marble. You make your way toward the Temple Mount, still standing for now. It's crowded, busy with worshippers, layered with sound, ram's horns, sandals on stone, the rustle of prayer shawls. But underneath the devotion there's anxiety. Rome is watching. Rome is waiting. And then it happens. You see smoke in the distance. The year is 70 CE. The Romans destroy the Second Temple. You're far enough to be safe, but not far enough to forget. Ash drifts through the air like ghost ink. A people's spiritual anchor is turned to rubble. Again. But something strange follows. You expect collapse. What you witness is evolution. With the temple gone, the priesthood diminished. Jewish survival pivots once more. This time toward the rabbinic model. The synagogue becomes more than just a gathering place. It becomes the center of Jewish life. The rabbi more than just a teacher. He becomes the architect of identity. You enter a small study hall. Shelves sag with scrolls. Boys and girls mutter chants under their breath. The teacher pauses to correct a student, not harshly, but with a kind of sleep-deprived determination that reminds you of a tired dad, fixing a toy at 2 a.m. with only one battery and some tape. This is how it survives. Not with armies, but with afternoons spent arguing about grammar in the book of Leviticus. And here's the real twist. As the Roman Empire expands, so does the Jewish diaspora. Jews now live in Gaul, in Spain, in North Africa, even in Rome itself. They're merchants, translators, doctors, astronomers, quietly indispensable, quietly resented. You overhear a Roman senator scoff. "They lend money but don't bow to Jupiter." A nearby scholar counters. "They lent me a physician who saved my daughter." Even in the heart of empire, the Jewish reputation is a paradox, needed yet mistrusted. You follow a merchant caravan leaving the port of Ostia. Along the road, they recite psalms to pass the time. Not loud, not public, but constant. It's how memory moves, hidden inside melodies smuggled across miles of empire. You pass by a Roman amphitheater where crowds cheer for spectacle, but your footsteps echo toward a dimly lit room where a scribe, by candlelight, is copying commentary on Exodus. No applause, just quiet defiance. One scholar whispers to another, "Rome thinks strength is in swords. We think it's in sentences." It sounds smug, but it's not. It's survival. By the end of the night, you find yourself in a Judean village rebuilt from ash. Chickens cluck. Bread bakes. A rabbi is asked a question about charity laws. He replies not with certainty, but with a story. It ends with another question. The child nods and walks away. And you realize, once again, this is a people who've learned not just how to live under empires, but how to outlast them. The fire crackles. The stars shift above what's left of Jerusalem. The temple is gone, but the scrolls are still open. You open your eyes and everything smells colder. Damp stone, wax candles, distant wood smoke. The empire is gone now, Rome has fallen, but the Jews are still here. Not in palaces, but in ghettos, villages, and small towns across medieval Europe. You're in a cramped study house in the Rhineland. The ceiling is low, the windows are fogged, and someone is arguing very gently about a misreading of Maimonides. It's warm in here, not because of fire, but because of focus. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where Jewish brilliance becomes both a torch and a target. You step out onto the cobbled streets. It's the 11th century. Most of the village is illiterate, but in the Jewish quarter, children are already learning Hebrew, Aramaic, and local dialects. Why? Because education isn't optional, it's survival. You follow a father and son to a tiny cheder, or schoolroom. No blackboards, just scrolls and repetition. The boy stumbles over a verse. The teacher pauses, corrects, smiles again and again, and again. This is where it gets interesting. Because while Europe sinks into feudal stagnation, nights, plagues, and all, Jewish communities become micro-networks of knowledge. They write letters to Spain. They debate ethics in France. They compile legal codes in Egypt. And wherever they go, they bring with them something rare, a culture of learning that includes the poor. In Jewish law, even the poorest man must teach his children. Even if he begs for bread by day, he must find time to study by night. It sounds noble, but it's also strategic, because knowledge is the only wealth that can't be stolen during a pogrom. Ah yes, the pogroms. You pass through a marketplace, where a whisper spreads like cold wind. The Jews poisoned the well. A lie, of course, but it spreads faster than the truth, as these things do. And so the pattern continues. In good times, Jews serve as doctors, moneylenders, translators, court advisors. Respected if not embraced. But when the wind shifts, when the crops fail or the plague returns, they become scapegoats, targets, too smart, too successful, too different. Historians still debate how much medieval anti-Semitism was rooted in religion versus economics versus envy. But you walking these cobbled streets feel it as a cocktail of all three. You duck into a synagogue hidden behind a bakery. A candle burns low. A rabbi leans over a table. He's compiling commentaries on the Talmud, not for fame, just so the next generation will have something to build on. You glance over his shoulder and see footnotes scribbled in the margins. Tiny arguments with scholars who've been dead for centuries. This is Jewish brilliance, not invention in isolation, but invention through conversation. Cross time. You follow a caravan eastward now toward Poland, Lithuania, Bohemia. In these lands, Jewish communities are granted some protection, a little autonomy. And what do they build? Not castles, yeshivas, academies of learning, places where debate is a spiritual act. Inside one, you see students hunched over ancient pages, arguing furiously but with joy. One leans back and says, "If we both agree too quickly, someone's not thinking hard enough." That's not arrogance. That's a survival mechanism. Because here's the sad truth: in almost every country, Jews are eventually expelled. England in 1290, France in 1306, Spain in 1492, and with each expulsion, they take nothing but their books and their brains. And yet, somehow the brilliance sharpens. It sharpens in exile, in translation, in adversity. The more you push this people out, the deeper they go into their texts, their logic, their language, because they have always known, that everything outside can be taken. But what's inside your mind? That's yours. You sit beside a fire now somewhere near Prague. An old man tells a story about a rabbi who built a golem, an artificial man of clay, to protect the Jews. It's a myth, of course, but a useful one, because when you can't fight with swords, you fight with stories. And even as the world darkens, the light of learning flickers on. The fire pops. The wind rattles the shutters. Somewhere another child is learning to read. Still here, still learning. You're walking now through the dusty streets of 15th century Spain, where the smell of orange blossoms mingles with burning parchment. The sun is too bright, the silence too loud. Something is about to end. You're in Sepharad, the Jewish name for Spain, and for centuries it's been a jewel of Jewish life, a golden age. Jewish poets write in Arabic. Jewish astronomers advise caliphs. Jewish doctors treat kings and peasants alike. There's tolerance, tension, and Torah, all braided together like a cord. In cities like Cordoba and Toledo, synagogues shimmer with Moorish arches and Hebrew verses carved into the plaster. You pass through one, and the cool interior wraps around you like a prayer whispered in 3 languages. But outside, the temperature is rising. The Reconquista is almost over. Christian rulers are pushing Islam out of Spain, and with them, the quiet pact of coexistence begins to crumble. You overhear a conversation, 2 nobles muttering about the conversos. These are Jews who've converted to Christianity, some out of faith, others out of fear. But their neighbors still suspect them. They light candles on Friday nights, someone says. They avoid pork. So begins one of the strangest chapters in the story. Being hated for who you were, even after becoming someone else. The Spanish Inquisition is not just about heresy. It's about control. The fear that someone might look like a Christian but still think like a Jew. It's about policing secrets. Historians still debate how many conversos secretly practiced Judaism and how many were merely victims of paranoia. But the result was the same: persecution. You find yourself outside a small house. The window is open. Inside, a family sits in silence. A mother lights candles but quickly blows them out. A boy reads Hebrew from memory, not from a scroll. It's all hidden, all hush-hush, but it's still there. And then comes 1492. Yes, the same year Columbus sails west. Spain expels the Jews. Not just the conversos suspected of crypto-Judaism, but the entire community. You watch as families pack their belongings, tie scrolls with twine, and kiss the mezuzah one last time. Some head to Portugal, others to North Africa, the Ottoman Empire, or the Levant. The scribe you saw earlier? He's now copying prayers onto the blank backs of maps. Because if you don't know where you're going, you bring what you can. And what do they bring? Books, recipes, proverbs, business acumen, portable wisdom. You meet a girl reciting proverbs from memory as she rocks on a boat headed for Istanbul. A rabbi teaching Sephardic melodies in Fez. A merchant restarting his spice business in Aleppo, using only reputation and the letter of a cousin. They don't have land. They don't have armies. But they have each other, and they have systems, contracts, community courts, charities that operate across continents. They rebuild faster than most empires expect. And here comes the irony again. The more they are exiled, the smarter they get at surviving exile. You stop in a modest print shop in Thessaloniki. Hebrew letters move across the press. The smell of ink is strong, and so is the energy. Jewish books are being printed faster than ever before. Thought is no longer just oral, it's industrial. You visit a Jewish home in Cairo. On the walls, maps of where relatives fled. On the table, a guest list for Passover with names from 5 countries. Still here, still learning. And now you start to see a pattern, don't you? Every attempt to erase Jewish life ends up sharpening it. Every trauma becomes a teacher. Every exile a course in reinvention. A puzzle, yes, but one they solve together. The fire crackles softly beside you. A breeze from the Mediterranean carries distant singing in Ladino. Not Hebrew, not Spanish, but something born of both. A hybrid language for a hybrid people. And even as the past burns, the melody remains. Now the landscape changes. You're in Eastern Europe. Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine. Lands of frost-bitten fields and whispering forests. The boots are muddier here, the bread denser, the prayers longer. You've entered the world of the Ashkenazim, a Jewish community that took root in Central and Eastern Europe after wave upon wave of Western exile. What began as scattered settlements becomes a civilization unto itself. You walk through a shtetl, a small village of wooden homes, chickens darting between feet, Yiddish echoing from one end to the other like a folk song that forgot how to end. This isn't the world of palaces. It's a world of modesty and rhythm. Work, prayer, study, laughter, fear, repeat. But even here, brilliance brews in unlikely places. You peek into a cheddar, the primary school. Boys as young as 5 chant from slates while chewing on dried apple slices. No one is rich, but everyone studies. You spot a 10-year-old correcting his teacher's pronunciation of a biblical verb. The teacher chuckles and nods. That's normal here, because here knowledge is democratized. Even the village tailor might know 4 tractates of the Talmud by heart. The blacksmith argues Jewish ethics between shoeing horses. And the women? Often literate in Yiddish, keepers of oral tradition, transmitters of lullabies and legal nuance alike. You step into a Beth Midrash, a study house, and it hums like a beehive. 2 elderly men are arguing about a 12th century commentator's interpretation of dietary law, and neither will budge until someone brings more tea. You realize they're not fighting. They're building. Historians still debate whether this educational intensity was the cause or the effect of Jewish marginalization in Europe. But one thing is certain, it created a culture that treasured thought as its highest currency, and it was a shield. Because on the outside, things were rarely stable. Pogroms swept through like sudden storms, sometimes from peasants, other times from czars. The accusation of Christ killer or blood libel or economic manipulation could turn neighbors into enemies overnight. You watch as a small town is razed for no reason anyone can explain. Books smolder. A Torah scroll is trampled. But the community survives. Not because they fight back with weapons, but because somewhere, someone has already rewritten the scroll by hand, stored it in a safer place, whispered the verses to their child. The pain doesn't stop the learning. It sharpens it. In the 18th century, you meet a strange new figure, a man dancing in the snow, muttering Kabbalistic phrases under his breath. He's a follower of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, a spiritual revival movement that brings joy back into a world weary with scholarship and suffering. The Hasidim teach that divine presence is everywhere, even in a spoon, even in a sigh. They sing, they dance. They remind the people that faith is not only in the mind, it's in the body, the heart, the rhythm of breath. And so now, Jewish brilliance stretches in new directions, from rigorous law to ecstatic song, from yeshiva to tish, from text to experience. Meanwhile, back in the cities, a different revolution brews. Enlightenment reaches the Jewish world. The Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment, encourages secular study, integration, new ideas. Jewish thinkers debate democracy, science, literature. You overhear a spirited argument in a Warsaw cafe. Can you be both German and Jewish? Can Torah live beside Darwin? What if I write poetry in the Goyish tongue? These aren't idle questions. They're urgent, because Europe is changing. Modernity beckons. Railways, factories, telegrams all push toward assimilation, and many Jews try. They become professors, bankers, journalists, composers. They speak the local language. They change their names. They hope that being brilliant and useful will make them safe. And yet, you walk past a university where Jewish students are denied admission quotas, despite being the top applicants. You see a newspaper with headlines blaming Jews for a bad harvest, a factory strike, an outbreak of typhus. You sigh. Still too different. Still too present. Still too smart to be invisible. Too vulnerable to be invincible. The irony deepens. The more Jews integrate, the more the myth of control is projected onto them. They run everything, whispers a man in a pub, as he drinks a beer delivered by a Jewish barkeep wearing threadbare shoes. You end the evening in a wooden synagogue. The candles burn low, the ark creaks open, and someone quietly recites a line from Psalms. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Still here, still learning. The candles flicker out, and when they return, you're standing in the middle of a bustling 19th century European capital, perhaps Vienna or Berlin or Budapest. Cobblestones have given way to pavement, and Torah scrolls now share shelf space with newspapers, microscopes, and novels. You're witnessing the Emancipation Era, a moment when, for the first time in centuries, Jews are being offered citizenship, rights, and a seat, albeit a wobbly one, at the tables of European society. There's a whiff of coffee and ambition in the air. Jewish names begin appearing in academia, the arts, the sciences. Freud peers into the human subconscious. Marx critiques the very system that made his bar mitzvah possible. Mahler writes symphonies that weep in Yiddish, even if the violins speak German. And as always, Jewish brilliance adapts to the moment. You peek inside a drawing room where salons are held nightly. Discussions of Spinoza, Darwin, Kant. A young Jewish woman challenges a philosopher twice her age on the ethics of reason. He tries to dismiss her. She doesn't blink. Elsewhere, Jewish entrepreneurs are building banks, railways, publishing houses, not to control the world as the later lies would claim, but to survive and occasionally thrive in a world that still holds its affection on a conditional lease. And yet, even as doors open, suspicions linger. Historians still debate whether 19th century assimilation was a genuine melting of barriers or just a temporary ceasefire. Either way, you're in the middle of it, and it feels uneasy, like walking a tightrope while someone shakes the pole. You stroll into a university library. A young Jewish student leafs through a physics textbook, pausing to scribble notes in the margins. The notes, you notice, are smarter than the textbook. His roommate enters. "You shouldn't show off," he says. "I'm not," replies the student. "I'm preparing for when they tell me I don't belong." Because deep down, most know that success doesn't equal safety, that being useful doesn't always mean being welcomed. You step into a courtroom where a Jewish lawyer defends a client brilliantly, and still hears slurs as he exits. You peek into a theater where Jewish playwrights revolutionize drama, but find their names removed from posters when patrons complain. The more visible Jewish excellence becomes, the more it's treated as a threat. A quiet tension grows beneath the surface. And then a spark. In France, 1894, the Dreyfus affair erupts. A Jewish army officer, Alfred Dreyfus, is falsely accused of treason. Evidence is forged. The nation erupts in anti-Semitic fervor. Death to the Jews is shouted in streets where enlightenment once promised reason. You attend the trial. The facts don't matter. The verdict was written before the gavel fell. Dreyfus stares ahead, unblinking. A young journalist watches from the crowd. His name is Theodor Herzl. He'll soon publish a book that will change everything. The Jewish state. A call for Jewish self-determination. Because now some begin to believe that no matter how much they adapt, they will never be accepted. That perhaps safety lies not in brilliance but in borders. And this realization isn't just political. It's deeply personal. You walk into a Jewish home, where 3 generations sit around a Sabbath table. The grandfather speaks only Yiddish. The father reads German newspapers. The son quotes Schopenhauer. The daughter plays Chopin on the piano. They are modern. They are grateful. They are afraid, because they can feel it. The rumble beneath the surface. The envy behind the smiles. The tension in the applause. And so once again, the community splits in two. Those who cling to the promise of Europe, and those who quietly begin packing bags just in case. A candle burns lower. A violin plays in another room. Somewhere in the shadows, a pamphlet is being written that blames the economic downturn on a global Jewish conspiracy. It's absurd, but it will sell. And so you step outside into the chilled twilight of a century about to combust. Still here, still learning, but the lesson is changing. Twilight deepens into shadow. You step forward and the air stiffens. The streets are quieter now, too quiet. You're in Germany. Early 1930s, there's music playing. From a phonograph in a cafe, but the laughter has a sharp edge to it, like everyone's pretending they don't hear the boots getting louder. You pass a bookstore Jewish-owned, where the windows have been smeared with paint. Juden Rouse. You pause. Inside, the owner is still arranging volumes alphabetically. His hand trembles, but he keeps going. This is the calm before the horror. Jewish brilliance has reached a dazzling peak here. Jewish doctors, artists, physicists, mathematicians, Einstein, yes, but also 100 less famous names who invented, taught, cured, composed, dreamed. You see one now sitting in a smoky lecture hall, solving an equation that might have changed the world. But it won't, because that chalkboard will soon be destroyed. And that student? She'll be wearing a yellow star within the year. Historians still argue whether the Holocaust was inevitable or unthinkable. But from where you're standing, in the moment, not the hindsight, it's terrifying how fast normal can unravel. You pass a cafe table where two elderly gentlemen argue whether to stay or leave. Germany is our home, one says. We fought for her. The other says nothing, just folds the letter from his cousin in New York one more time. The irony sharpens unbearably. Because Jews have never been more German, more integrated, more academically recognized, yet within months they'll be legal ghosts. Their shops smashed, their children expelled, their books burned. You walk through a university courtyard, once filled with Jewish scholars. Now students throw volumes into a bonfire. Someone laughs. Someone sings. The fire cracks loud as it devours centuries of Jewish thought. A boy walks by and mutters, "They think too much anyway." You travel next to Poland, Hungary, Lithuania. Whole communities, once vibrant, musical, argumentative, brilliant, are herded into ghettos, then trains, then silence. In a makeshift school inside the Warsaw Ghetto, you watch a teacher recite math problems to a class of starving children, not because anyone expects a future, but because knowledge is defiance. In Auschwitz, a rabbi draws letters in soot on a wall. He's trying to remember the wording of a Talmudic passage, not to escape, but to keep it alive. This isn't brilliance that gets published. This is brilliance that whispers its name through barred windows and barbed wire. And yet, even here, it survives. You meet a woman who teaches music to children in a transit camp, a boy who scratches out a poem before boarding a train, a man who sketches chemical reactions on a wall with a nail. Still here, still learning, and yet 6 million gone. Among them, scientists, tailors, violinists, bakers, philosophers, dreamers, children, the smartest among them and the quietest alike. You feel the weight of it, the smoke in the sky. The silence in Europe afterward, not just of voices, but of conversations that can no longer continue. But in the ashes, something else stirs. The survivors scatter to Israel, America, South Africa, Argentina. And what do they bring? As always, languages, recipes, ideas, and grief. In New York, a refugee teaches math at a public high school. In Tel Aviv, a violinist rebuilds her symphony. In Johannesburg, a merchant reopens his father's spice shop. In London, a scholar translates Yiddish poetry no one else remembers. They don't forget, but they don't vanish either. The world had tried to erase Jewish brilliance. Instead, it's now woven deeper into the global fabric. And if you think this story ends here, you don't know how long a people can hold breath, plant roots, and rise again. You leave a candle by a memorial wall. Etched into the stone are names, not just of the lost, but of the ideas they carried. You don't know what most of them were, but someone somewhere is whispering them back into being, still here, still learning. The smoke fades. You blink, and now you're standing in a small apartment in Brooklyn, circa 1950. It smells like pickles, ink, and freshly ironed shirts. The furniture's modest. The mezuzah hangs slightly crooked. But the bookshelf is bursting. You're in a Jewish household built from the ruins of exile. And the brilliance? It's back. Not loud, not flashy, but rebuilding itself quietly in libraries, living rooms, and night schools. Across the world, in cities like New York, Paris, Buenos Aires, and Tel Aviv, Jewish thought is stretching its legs again. There's no single homeland, but there is a kind of global classroom forming. Refugees become professors, poets, engineers. Former prisoners become deans. Holocaust survivors teach Shakespeare in second-hand coats. You visit a crowded university lecture hall in Chicago. The physics professor is soft-spoken, his accent thick, but every head is tilted forward, because he just described the subatomic behavior of a universe nobody saw coming. He used to study in Berlin, then came 1938, now he studies light. Meanwhile, in Israel, the experiment of statehood is taking its first trembling breaths. A new Jewish homeland rises, not as myth but as matter. Roads, armies, universities. Hebrew, once only for prayer, is now used for tax forms, traffic signs, and sitcoms. You walk through a bustling Tel Aviv market. Amid the fruit stands and rug stalls, a street performer juggles while reciting Talmud. You laugh. It feels new and ancient all at once. But even in this new land, tension follows. Conflict. Complication. Brilliance doesn't grant immunity. It often attracts fire. Back in America, the suburbs grow. A new middle class emerges. Jewish families send their children to school with lunch boxes and latent trauma, and somehow both the anxiety and the ambition get passed down. You watch a 12-year-old named Ruth argue with her rabbi over a Torah passage. He smiles. She's not wrong. That girl will grow up to become a Supreme Court justice. In LA, a man born in Belarus writes movies that make millions laugh. His name, Mel Brooks. His trauma, hidden beneath comedy like a lemon seed in cake. Historians still debate whether post-war Jewish success in the West was the result of cultural values, communal structures, or the accidental opening of certain economic gates. But you can see something deeper. A people who've spent millennia surviving by learning, adapting, and betting on thought. In 1970s Manhattan, you sit in a jazz club as a Jewish saxophonist improvises through something that feels like exile and return in exile again. Nobody says it, but everyone hears it. You duck into a bookstore where a Jewish woman with curly hair and combat boots is reading philosophy next to a man sketching molecules. They don't know each other, but they're both children of the same library of pain and wit. Elsewhere, in Cambridge and Stanford, Nobel Prizes are being earned. In kitchens, bagels are being boiled. On couches, old men argue whether Spinoza would have liked Woody Allen. It's funny, and deeply not funny, because the joke always has teeth. And behind the success, the nervous glance remains. A magazine headline reads, "Why are Jews so smart?" Another whispers, "Are they running Hollywood?" Same song, new verse. Brilliance brings attention. Attention brings projection. Projection, as always, invites suspicion. You see a pattern again, the cycle of envy and admiration. But you also see something new, a confidence. Jewish thought isn't just surviving anymore, it's shaping the story. You end the evening in a living room where 3 generations watch Fiddler on the Roof. The grandfather sings. The granddaughter rolls her eyes. But she still mouths the lyrics. Still here, still learning. A new century arrives. You find yourself walking through a sleek campus hallway. Glass walls, indoor gardens, recycled air. The signs are in English and Hebrew. You're in Silicon Wadi, Israel's tech heartland. They call it the startup nation now. In one lab, a young Jewish engineer codes an AI to mimic human emotion. In another, a teenager sketches circuitry that could transform agricultural yield. And in the cafe nearby, someone orders mint tea and mutters, "We need a better battery algorithm before Tuesday." Jewish brilliance has entered the digital age. Meanwhile, across the ocean, you stroll through Harvard, MIT, Yale, names synonymous with modern prestige. A significant percentage of faculty, researchers, deans, Jewish. Quietly, persistently, their fingerprints are on everything from cancer research to social theory. But something odd happens. You overhear a whisper. They're overrepresented. You pause. It's not shouted. Not spray painted on a wall. Just whispered. but the whisper carries centuries behind it. You move through a bustling newsroom, a comedy writer's room, a biochemistry lab, a civil rights organization, and in each space, you find Jewish names at the table, not always leading, but always building. And that's the twist of this era. Jewish brilliance is no longer concentrated in synagogues or ghettos or hidden seminaries. It's everywhere, integrated, visible. And with that visibility comes tension. Historians still argue whether modern anti-Semitism has morphed into something subtler, coded, more polite, but just as dangerous. Others say the fears are overblown. But you know better. You've seen the cycle too many times. You scroll through a comment section where a Jewish scientist is accused of bias simply for being Jewish. You attend a lecture where someone says Zionist but means Jew. You see a swastika spray painted on a university dorm in 2022. Some things don't need to be updated to work. Yet despite this, the brilliance continues. In New York, a Jewish woman wins the Nobel Prize for Literature. In Berlin, a descendant of Holocaust survivors lectures in the same hall where Nazi policy was once drafted. In South Korea, children study the Talmud, not for religion, but because they believe it sharpens the mind. You smile. And still, you see the double bind. Jewish people are praised for intellect, then punished for being too smart. Admired for success, then accused of secret power. Welcomed into systems, then blamed for corrupting them. It's the same dance in a new costume. But now Jewish identity has split into many forms. Some are deeply religious, preserving rituals and texts. Others are secular, cultural, artistic, scientific. Some are Zionist. Some are anti-Zionist. Some have never been to synagogue. Some go daily, and yet they share something. A gravity. A tension. A memory of the scroll, the fire, the question, the answer, the exile, the return. You pass through a modern Jewish school. The children are building robots. One raises her hand and asks, "Can my robot keep kosher?" The teacher blinks, smiles. Maybe. You step into a Brooklyn apartment where someone is coding in Python while their grandmother hums a Yiddish lullaby in the kitchen. Still here. Still learning. Still arguing. Still doubted. Still building. You step into the now. It's a chilly evening in 2025, and the world buzzes in 1,000 languages on glowing screens. You're everywhere at once. Tel Aviv, Toronto, Buenos Aires, Berlin, Johannesburg, Seoul, Kyiv. The diaspora has spread, evolved, pixelated. And Jewish brilliance? Still thriving, still complicated. You scroll through a thread where a Jewish physicist proposes a revolutionary theory of time. It's elegant. It's controversial. And beneath it, the comments pour in. Typical. She's one of them. What did you expect? A chill runs down your spine. That ancient whisper has learned to type. But also another thread. A group of Jewish teenagers discussed literature, gender identity, climate activism, kashrut, grief, and comedy, all in the same breath. They quote RBG and Spinoza. They make memes about Moses. They joke about the Talmud being the original hyperlinked text. You laugh. It's not wrong. You walk through the virtual halls of Wikipedia, academia, YouTube. Jewish voices diverse, often disagreeing, argue publicly, creatively, restlessly. And behind almost every success, there's someone's great-grandparent who once smuggled books in a boot or recited Torah in a whisper beneath floorboards. In Los Angeles, a Jewish screenwriter pens a sci-fi epic that subtly mirrors the Book of Exodus. In Nigeria, a rabbi discusses Igbo Jewish connections over Zoom with a congregation he mentors remotely. In Gaza and Tel Aviv, children dream of futures free from fire. You hear Hasidic nigunim remixed into lofi beats. You read Kabbalah commentary overlaid on Marvel movies. You attend a digital seder, where each participant lives on a different continent. It's chaotic. It's beautiful. Still, the questions remain. Why are Jewish people so often stereotyped as clever manipulators? Why does success attract suspicion more than celebration? Why does "they're just good at business" still echo with the barbs of blood libel? Historians still debate how much of this is old wine in new bottles. Some say Jewish resilience is the envy of the world. Others claim anti-Semitism is the last socially acceptable hatred. Some blame elites, never noticing the contradiction between labeling a people as both elite and exterminated, and then there's the ever-awkward conversation around Israel. For some it's hope, home survival. For others it's politics, power, or pain. And somehow, Jews across the globe are held responsible for a government they may not vote for, a place they've never been, or a conflict older than their passport. You sigh. It's all a lot. And yet even now, especially now, Jewish minds continue to offer the world new ideas. A Jewish microbiologist designs vaccines for future pandemics. A Jewish poet rewrites the Psalms in response to climate collapse. A Jewish gamer builds a fantasy world based on the Book of Judges. You pause at a quiet moment in a classroom. A teacher, young, bearded, tired, tells his students about his great-grandfather, who escaped a pogrom and became a cobbler in Queens. Why cobbler? One kid asks. He said shoes were the only thing no one could argue with. The class laughs. You linger at the edge of that laughter, because you know what it cost to get here. You know that behind each moment of safety is a history of the opposite, and yet still here. Still learning, still doubted, still dreaming. You take a deep breath, stepping into a quiet study lit by the blue glow of a laptop. The date reads next week. The future is now just one scroll away, and Jewish thought still unfolding. You watch as a Jewish neuroscientist live streams a lecture on consciousness from a converted garage in Vancouver. She quotes Maimonides, then pivots to quantum mechanics. In the chat, someone types, "Too smart for her own good." Another responds, "Brilliant." There it is again, that twin gaze. Admiration and suspicion, fused like two sides of an ancient coin. Across the world in Nairobi, a young rabbi leads Torah study over WhatsApp. The participants, LGBTQ teens, elders, atheists, seekers. No one agrees. Everyone listens. You smile. A professor in Seoul teaches the Talmud as a logic system. A rapper in London rhymes about his grandfather's menorah being stolen by Nazis. A YouTuber in Melbourne breaks down kashrut using Minecraft pigs. And somehow it all fits. But something else stirs, an undertone of unease. Online hate rises in new shapes, deepfakes, forums, hashtags. A popular influencer casually jokes about Jewish space lasers. You glance at the likes. Too many. Historians still argue, is this the rebirth of old anti-Semitism, or just the same virus in a new host? Meanwhile, conspiracy theories thrive. The Jews control the media. The Jews started this war. The Jews are behind it all. These ideas echo like ghosts, absurd and dangerous, laughable and lethal. And yet what's more remarkable is how many simply keep going. A Jewish dad teaches his daughter to bake challah. A teenager in Kyiv sneaks matzah into class during Passover. A woman in Buenos Aires leads a book club on Jewish mysticism and Star Trek. They aren't trying to prove anything. They're just living. You sit in on a graduate seminar on Jewish history. The students are every shade, accent, belief. They debate exile and home, trauma and resilience. And when one asks, why do people hate us? The professor pauses, then says, because we refuse to disappear. You step into a community center in Johannesburg, where Jewish kids learn Zulu and coding. In Paris, a synagogue becomes a pop-up vaccine clinic. In Haifa, a Muslim and a Jew co-author a book on ancient irrigation. And in Warsaw, an old man lights Shabbat candles alone, whispering names no one remembers. You stand with him, because those names matter. Still here, still learning, still feared, still loving, still asking questions no one else will, and answering in ways no one else thought to try. Now you're floating, not in any single country, but in something broader. The cultural current, the idea stream, the collective mind of humanity, where stories flow and symbols collide, and Jewish thought swims through it like a phosphorescent fish. Tiny, brilliant, often misunderstood. You hear a podcast host, not Jewish, discussing business ethics. He quotes the Talmud, doesn't even know it. But the phrasing, the layered reasoning, it traces back to that long-ago scroll in a dim-lit room. You see it again in an indie video game that builds morality trees using questions from Mishnaic logic. The developer, an atheist, but his grandfather once whispered prayers into his dreams. It's hard to tell where Jewish brilliance ends and human curiosity begins, but you still see the flare-ups, the suspicion. A university decides to cap Jewish enrollment for diversity reasons. A celebrity retweets a meme with a hooked nose and money bags. A book release is boycotted, not because of content, but the author's last name. You hear the whispers again, familiar, exhausting. Too powerful. Too clever. They never stop. But that's the thing, isn't it? They never stop. Never stop thinking, questioning, reinventing, rebuilding. You walk through an art gallery in São Paulo. One canvas is titled Diaspora Circuitry. It shows lines connecting Warsaw, Baghdad, Brooklyn, Jerusalem, Addis Ababa. The caption reads, "Jewish memory is a software that updates even when unplugged." You smile. That's not just art. That's survival strategy. In Tokyo, a Jewish woman teaches traditional Japanese tea ceremony and ends each class with a Yiddish proverb. In Alaska, a convert lights Shabbat candles at 3 p.m. In Delhi, a Jewish scientist studies sound waves in ancient texts. The map is full. You hear critics say, they stick together too much. And in the next breath, they've lost their traditions. Both accusations, opposite, mutually exclusive, but somehow both hurled in the same tone. Historians still argue whether Jewish identity is a religion, an ethnicity, a culture, a burden, a gift, or all of the above. You sit beside a campfire on a hill in Montana, where a Jewish teenager plays Leonard Cohen on guitar. He doesn't keep kosher, but he keeps coming back to the music. You peek into a Parisian cafe, where someone is editing a documentary on Sephardic lullabies. Down the street, another writes a script about 3 generations of Ashkenazi bakers. Neither knows the other. Both are keeping memory alive. You realize Jewish brilliance isn't about IQ or success. It's about friction. The clash between exile and identity, silence and scholarship, humor and grief, risk and ritual, fire and text. It's not better, just durable. It bends like reeds in a storm. But it never stops whispering, what if? And in a world addicted to answers, that question, that quiet, persistent, brilliant question, is what gets people in trouble, and is also what keeps them alive. Still here, still learning, still wrong in all the best ways. You return to where you began. A quiet room, low light, the faint sound of a clock ticking somewhere in the walls. And in this hush, you start to notice how loud Jewish history truly is. Not in shouts, but in layers. 1,000 voices talking over centuries. Some praying, some arguing, some telling bad jokes over good soup. And behind it all, the stubborn hum of intellect. The reflex to ask why when the world insists on because. You think of how many Jewish children were told they were too curious. How many were hushed by fear or danger, or simply by parents too tired to explain again why the world is the way it is. And still they asked. Still they built. Still they wrote and studied and wondered and refused to disappear. You're back in a library now, but not one of stone. This is a living library, stretching from Babylon to Brooklyn, from Seville to Shanghai. You run your fingers across invisible shelves. A Torah scroll, a copy of Portnoy's complaint, a sheaf of notes from a shtetl school, an algorithm for optimizing network flow, a joke about Moses in a coffee shop, a violin piece composed in hiding, a recipe for kugel annotated in 4 languages. So many ways of being smart. And yet the world has never stopped asking, why them? Why the Jews? You've heard the answers. They read more. They value education. They have networks. They're used to being outsiders. You've heard the worst ones too. Historians still argue over it. So do psychologists, theologians, economists, and drunk uncles at weddings. But the truest answer might be this. They were never allowed to stop thinking. They couldn't rely on kings or armies. They didn't have safety. What they had was memory, books, laughter, worry, and a deep, unshakable belief that even the worst question deserved an answer. Even if it came in the form of another question. And even now, in a world on fire with information, disinformation, and algorithmic chaos, Jewish minds continue asking, teaching, creating, not because they want to dominate, because they refuse to disappear. You breathe slowly now. The edges of the world soften. The voice is quiet. The bookshelf fades. You lie back, and in your last waking thought, you imagine a small light in a window somewhere, an old scholar, perhaps still up, still reading, still wrestling with the question that kept him up last night and 1,000 nights before, still here, still learning, still whispering, why not? And now as the last pages settle and the questions rest, let your breath begin to slow. You've traveled far tonight, through time, through fire, through libraries and laboratories and laughter and grief. You've met people who never stopped thinking, even when the world told them not to. You've wandered ancient marketplaces, silent ghettos, Ivy League halls, noisy family kitchens, all filled with the hum of minds refusing to go dark. Let that hum drift away now. Let the weight of history, heavy as it is, slip gently off your shoulders. The arguments are quiet now. The books are closed. The candle burns low but steady. You are safe here. You don't need to solve anything tonight. No tests, no debates, no proving yourself. The thoughts will wait. The questions will keep. For now, just imagine the warmth of a small fire. The kind that crackles gently. The kind that survived 1,000 winters. Let its glow wrap around you like an old prayer or a favorite sweater. In the distance, someone is still studying. Someone is still singing. But you can rest now. You're part of the story, and the story, like you, is still unfolding. So close your eyes, let the questions float away, and sleep, gentle and curious. Sleep, sleep sweet dreams.